Hi guys, my name's Katie, and the study that I designed that I'll be presenting today is looking at the impact of moderate intensity versus high intensity exercise on resting levels of fat oxidation. So the core question that I'm looking to answer is which exercise modality, steady state moderate intensity or high intensity interval exercise produces the greatest fat oxidation at rest. Just some background on this topic and why I wanted to research it. Obesity is obviously an epidemic in the US, and at the same time, many people feel that they are too busy and they don't have the time to work out consistently. So obviously for people who want to lose weight, particularly fat mass, they want to know how to maximize their time to choose the right type of exercise that's not only going to burn the greatest number of calories, but also the most fat in the least amount of time. Existing research suggests that lower intensity exercises utilize more fat as fuel instead of carbohydrates, but lower intensity exercise to burn a high number of calories, it takes more time to perform. So I wanted to see if there's a better and more efficient way to burn fat in a shorter period of time. And I'll just quickly run through some studies that support both low moderate intensity exercise and also high intensity exercise for greater fat oxidation. In these two studies here, you can see that these researchers found that, I believe these are both looking at obese individuals, when they performed workouts at both low moderate intensities and high intensities, they found that their fat oxidation was actually greater on the lower scale at lower intensity exercise. These two studies found the opposite. The first study was looking at recreationally trained young men, had them do interval style spin classes as well as steady state endurance cycling classes, and they found that the fat oxidation was significantly higher in the interval style class. The second study looked at obese individuals instead, but even in that population they found that when they were working out above their maximal capacity at an intense level, they achieved greater resting fat oxidation. And of course, there are some studies that found no significant difference, whether the individuals were trained or untrained. No matter what type of exercise they were performing, they didn't find differences in their fat or their carbohydrate oxidation. So some of the questions I think that remain unanswered. First of all, does baseline fitness matter? The studies that supported high intensity exercise, as you saw, one was using younger fit men, the other was using obese sedentary individuals. So it remains to be seen, if you want to find an efficient workout for an obese population, then a study that's looking at younger fit men, the findings might not be applicable to them. Most of these studies were also pretty short. None of them lasted longer than 10 weeks. And they didn't measure the resting fat oxidation over time, only immediately after the workout. So I wanted to see if that level of fat oxidation could be maintained over time once an exercise is completed over a longer period of time more consistently. So the study that I designed is a randomized controlled trial. And my plan was to recruit 16 Class 1 obese men and 16 Class 1 obese women ages 25 to 35 from primary care physician offices. If they have any pre-existing cardiovascular or heart conditions, they would be excluded. They would also have to get clearance from their doctor that it's safe to exercise and sign an informed consent form. And that group would be split evenly, 8 men and 8 women each, into a moderate intensity exercise group and a high intensity exercise group. So both of the workouts that both groups would do, they would perform them for 4 days a week for 3 months. It would be performed in the evening before dinner, but after 2 hours of fasting so that they don't have high circulating levels of glucose or fatty acids or anything like that in their blood. They would have a baseline VO2 max test done using a treadmill test. So the intensity levels are sort of individualistic to each participant. Their heart rates would be tracked by a heart rate monitor that they would wear on their wrist or chest. And the workouts would be done under the supervision of a fitness trainer who will also make sure that they're hitting the right intensity levels and complying to the workouts. One of the variables that's important to control for this study is diet. It's impossible to completely eliminate the influence of diet, but I wanted to try to get each participant to be consuming similar macronutrient ranges. So instead of putting them on a very specific prescribed diet, I thought it was best to not restrict calories, but have them instead aim to consume the AMDR recommended amounts for fat, carbohydrates, and protein so that they have a similar makeup of their diet. And I would ask them to keep a food diary throughout this project that could be checked just to make sure that they are complying with those macronutrient ranges. I didn't want to go with a caloric restriction because if that significantly reduces the amount of fat or carbohydrates that they ordinarily eat, then I thought that could potentially skew the results of this trial. And if they have elevated fat oxidation, it could be because they are consuming more fat and less carbohydrates, and I wanted the results to be more specific to the workout and more easily linked to the workout and not their diet. So I would measure their energy expenditure and their fat oxidation in the morning after the workout in a fasted state, 3 days after the trial, and 7 days after the trial, and that would be done using indirect calorimetry. Gas collection for 15 minutes would be done while they're fasted, and then a non-protein respiratory quotient from the VO2 max test could be used to calculate their fat oxidation level. Again, one of the big limitations of this study is that it does not eliminate the influence of diet completely. I thought that was outside the scope of this study that's more focused on the exercise trials. It doesn't include resistance training, which is also an area for future research, I think. And even though it includes both men and women, it doesn't necessarily examine the differences in the gender response to these exercise trials. But its strength is that it does lay the groundwork for future study in that area. The biggest strength of the study, I think, is that the exercise trials are taking place over 3 months, a longer period of time, and it measures fat oxidation 1 week after the exercise trial, which previous studies haven't gone that far in the future to measure the resting fat oxidation. So the results that I expect from this study would shed light on which form of exercise elevates resting fat oxidation levels the most over a longer period of time. And I would suspect that the applications could help overweight people choose an exercise program that will give them maximal fat loss in the shortest period of time. It's important to note, though, that this would be applicable for fat loss, but not necessarily athletic performance. So again, it's specific to that population of overweight people who want to lose fat. As I mentioned before, an area for future study after this trial would be looking more specifically at men's and women's metabolic responses to different exercise modalities. I did come across research suggesting that the secretion of sex hormones is different for men and women during and after exercise, so there's definitely a gender-mediated response that could be looked at more closely. Studies that look at strength and resistance training would also be helpful. It's a different style of workout that could have similar effects that we just don't know about. I think it's also worth studying the acceptability and adherence to different types of exercise programs. If a high-intensity interval style workout was found to be more effective for elevating fat oxidation, it doesn't do a lot of good if people can't stick with that type of workout over time. So I think it's worth looking to see what style of workout people are more likely to stick with, because consistency is obviously important as well. And these are just some of the references I used to inform my study. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.